The morning sun carved silver streaks through the cockpit canopy of Hauptmann Klaus Weber's Focke-Wulf 190 as he banked left, scanning the horizon for Allied bombers. Below, the patchwork fields of occupied France stretched endlessly, scarred by the fresh wounds of D-Day operations. Weber's radio crackled with the familiar voices of his squadron, 12 seasoned pilots of Jagdgeschwader 26, veterans who had survived 3 years of aerial combat over Europe. Achtung, Indianer at 2 o'clock high, came the sharp voice of his wingman, Oberleutnant Hans Müller. Weber's eyes snapped to the designated sector, where a formation of dark specks grew larger against the azure sky. American fighters, but not the sleek Mustangs or nimble lightnings they had grown accustomed to engaging. These were different. Bulkier, heavier. Mein Gott, Weber muttered into his oxygen mask. What are those flying bathtubs? The approaching aircraft were Republic P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group, their massive radial engines thundering at 2,000 horsepower each. To the German pilots, accustomed to the elegant lines of their Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, the P-47s looked like flying bricks. 7 tons of American steel and aluminum that seemed to defy the basic principles of aerodynamics. Captain Robert "Gabby" Gabreski, leading the American formation, adjusted his throttle and checked his instruments. The 25-year-old Polish-American pilot from Oil City, Pennsylvania, had already claimed 28 aerial victories, making him one of the top American aces in Europe. His P-47D-25, nicknamed Hun Hunter, carried 850 caliber machine guns loaded with 3,400 rounds of ammunition, enough firepower to saw a locomotive in half. "Bandits, 12 o'clock level," Gabreski's voice cut through the radio static to his squadron. "Looks like a dozen 190s. Remember, boys, don't try to turn with them. Use your speed and dive performance." What the German pilots didn't know, what intelligence reports had failed to convey, was that the P-47 Thunderbolt possessed a secret weapon that would revolutionize air combat over Europe. Beneath its ungainly exterior lay the most sophisticated turbo supercharger system ever installed in a fighter aircraft, capable of maintaining full power at altitudes where other fighters gasped for air. Weber initiated the attack, diving his Focke-Wulf 190 toward the American formation. His aircraft, weighing 4.4 tons and powered by a BMW 801D radial engine producing 1,100 horsepower, had dominated European skies since 1941. The 190's roll rate of 180 degrees per second and climb rate of 2,350 feet per minute had made it the terror of Allied bomber crews. Weber had personally shot down 47 Allied aircraft, including 12 heavy bombers. "Easy pickings," Weber radioed to his squadron as they began their attack dive. "These American pigs are too heavy to maneuver." The initial engagement unfolded exactly as Weber expected. His cannon shells, 20mm Mauser MG-151s firing at 750 rounds per minute, raked across the wing of Lieutenant Jimmy Stewart's P-47. The American fighter shuddered under the impact, hydraulic fluid streaming from punctured lines, but continued flying. Weber pulled up for another pass, confident in his tactical superiority. But Gabreski had other plans. "All Zemke's Wolf Pack, this is Gabby. Execute Thunderbolt dive, now." What happened next defied everything the German pilots thought they knew about aerial combat. The 8 P-47s suddenly nosed over into steep dives, their massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engines roaring at maximum power. Within seconds, the flying bricks were accelerating past 450 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could safely dive. Weber watched in disbelief as the P-47s plummeted earthward like guided meteors. He pushed his own aircraft into a dive, but the Focke-Wulf 190's airframe began to shudder violently at 420 mph. His control surfaces grew heavy, unresponsive. The laws of physics that governed aerial combat had suddenly shifted. At 15,000 feet, Gabreski pulled out of his dive and executed a climbing turn that brought him directly behind Weber's aircraft. The German pilot, still struggling with his controls after the high-speed dive, found himself trapped in the P-47's gun sight. 8 50 caliber machine guns opened fire simultaneously, their combined rate of fire reaching 4,800 rounds per minute. The effect was devastating. Weber's Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrated under the concentrated firepower, its fuel tanks exploding in an orange fireball that could be seen from 20 miles away. The veteran German ace, who had survived the Battle of Britain and countless engagements over the Eastern Front, never had a chance to bail out. Lieutenant Colonel Francis "Gabby" Gabreski would later describe the engagement. The P-47 was like a heavyweight boxer with the speed of a middleweight. Once we learned to use our strengths, altitude performance, and dive speed, the Germans couldn't touch us. But the real revelation came from captured German documents recovered after the war. Luftwaffe technical reports from June 1944 revealed that German engineers had completely underestimated the P-47's performance capabilities. They had calculated the Thunderbolt's maximum dive speed at 380 mph, nearly 100 mph slower than its actual capability. This intelligence failure would prove catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. What nobody knew at the time was that Republic Aviation had solved one of the most complex engineering challenges in aviation history. The P-47's turbo supercharger system, developed in secret collaboration with General Electric, allowed the massive fighter to maintain sea-level power output at altitudes exceeding 40,000 feet. While German fighters lost 30% of their power above 25,000 feet, the P-47 actually became more dangerous as altitude increased. The strategic implications were immediate and devastating. Before the introduction of high-altitude P-47 tactics in June 1944, German fighters maintained a 2.3.1 kill ratio against American bombers and their escorts. Within 3 months, that ratio had reversed to 1.42 in favor of the Americans. The Luftwaffe lost 1,684 experienced pilots between June and September 1944. Irreplaceable veterans who had taken years to train. Oberst Adolf Galland, general of the fighter arm, would later write in his memoirs, "The appearance of the P-47 at high altitude changed everything. We had been fighting the wrong war in the wrong sky. The human cost was staggering. Luftwaffe pilot casualties increased by 340% in the 3 months following D-Day, while American fighter losses dropped by 60%. The average life expectancy of a German fighter pilot fell from 87 combat missions to just 23. Young men barely out of flight school were being thrown into combat against seasoned American aces flying superior aircraft." Unteroffizier Heinrich Müller, a 19-year-old pilot from Bavaria, survived his first encounter with P-47s over France in July 1944. His account, preserved in Luftwaffe archives, captures the psychological impact. "They came out of the sun like falling anvils. My Messerschmitt felt like a toy airplane. I fired everything I had, but they just absorbed the hits and kept coming. When that big American fighter pulled alongside me, I could see the pilot's face. He looked at me for a moment, then waggled his wings and flew away. I think he took pity on me." The technological gap extended beyond raw performance. P-47s carried advanced radio equipment that allowed coordinated attacks across multiple squadrons. Their pilots trained on sophisticated flight simulators that didn't exist in Germany. Most critically, American pilots flew with unlimited fuel and ammunition, while their German counterparts were increasingly restricted by shortages. By August 1944, the average P-47 pilot flew 200 hours of training before combat deployment. German pilots were entering combat with as little as 30 hours of flight time. The disparity in experience, combined with superior equipment, created a death spiral for the Luftwaffe that would accelerate until war's end. The economic implications were equally devastating. Each P-47 cost $83,000 to produce in 1944 dollars, approximately $1.2 million in today's currency. Germany's equivalent fighter, the Focke-Wulf 190, cost 117,000 Reichsmarks, roughly $140,000 in current dollars. But while American factories produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, German production of all fighter types combined totaled just 12,807 aircraft from 1943-1945. The industrial capacity gap was insurmountable. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant could produce 25 P-47s per day at peak production. Germany's entire fighter aircraft industry, scattered across dozens of bomb-damaged facilities, struggled to produce 30 fighters daily across all types. American pilots flew aircraft that were replaced faster than they could be shot down, while German pilots flew increasingly obsolete machines that couldn't be replaced at all. Captain Gabreski's success in the P-47 exemplified this transformation. Between March and August 1944, he shot down 31 German aircraft without losing a single wingman. His tactics, high-altitude patrol followed by high-speed diving attacks, became standard doctrine for all P-47 units. The Thunderbolt dive that had surprised Weber's squadron was refined into a systematic method for destroying German fighters with minimal risk. The psychological warfare aspect was equally important. German pilots began referring to P-47s as Himmelsdonner, thunder of heaven, and developed an almost superstitious fear of engaging them at high altitude. Luftwaffe combat reports from late 1944 frequently mention pilots breaking off attacks when P-47s appeared, even when the Americans were outnumbered. But the human stories behind the statistics reveal the true cost of technological superiority. Hauptmann Klaus Weber left behind a wife and 2 young children in Hamburg. His final letter home, written 3 days before his death, expressed growing pessimism about Germany's chances. "The Americans have too many planes, too much fuel, too many pilots. We are fighting the sky itself." Lieutenant Jimmy Stewart, whose P-47 was damaged in that June engagement, survived the war and returned to his family farm in Iowa. He flew 89 combat missions and was credited with destroying 12 German aircraft. In a 1994 interview, he reflected, "I never celebrated shooting down another pilot. Those German boys were just doing their job, same as us. The difference was, we had better tools to do it with." The strategic bombing campaign that the P-47 helped make possible devastated German industrial capacity. By December 1944, German aircraft production had fallen to 20% of peak levels. Fuel shortages grounded entire fighter squadrons. The Luftwaffe, which had terrorized Europe in 1940, was reduced to a token force by early 1945. The ripple effects extended far beyond aviation. German ground forces, deprived of air cover, became increasingly vulnerable to Allied tactical aircraft. The Wehrmacht's mobility, which had been the key to early victories, was systematically destroyed by P-47s and other Allied fighters operating with impunity over German-controlled territory. Perhaps most significantly, the P-47's success demonstrated the decisive importance of industrial capacity in modern warfare. Germany's technological innovations, jet engines, guided missiles, advanced radar, couldn't overcome the fundamental disadvantage of fighting an enemy that could produce weapons faster than they could be destroyed. The final irony was that German engineers had actually developed superior fighter designs by 1944. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter was faster than any Allied aircraft. The Focke-Wulf Ta-152 could outclimb and outmaneuver the P-47 at high altitude. But these advanced designs arrived too late and in too few numbers to affect the war's outcome. By war's end, P-47 Thunderbolts had flown 546,000 combat sorties and destroyed 11,974 enemy aircraft, more than any other Allied fighter type. They had also destroyed 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, and 6,000 armored vehicles in ground attack missions. The flying brick that German pilots had initially dismissed became the most versatile and effective fighter bomber of World War II. The lessons learned from P-47 operations influenced aircraft design for decades. The importance of high-altitude performance, robust construction, and overwhelming firepower became standard requirements for military aircraft. The Thunderbolt's success also validated the American approach to warfare, using industrial superiority to overwhelm enemies through sheer quantity and quality of equipment. Captain Gabreski survived the war as America's top-scoring P-47 ace with 31 confirmed victories. He continued flying fighters through the Korean War and eventually retired as a colonel. In his memoirs, he wrote, "The P-47 taught us that in aerial combat, as in life, appearances can be deceiving. What looks clumsy on the ground can be graceful in its element." The transformation of aerial warfare between 1943 and 1945 represented more than just technological progress. It demonstrated how quickly military advantages could shift when innovation met industrial capacity. The German pilots who laughed at the P-47's ungainly appearance learned too late that in war, effectiveness matters more than elegance. Today, surviving P-47 Thunderbolts are treasured museum pieces, their massive radial engines silent after decades of peace. But their legacy lives on in every modern fighter aircraft that prioritizes performance over appearance, substance over style. In the crucible of war, the most dangerous enemy is often the one you underestimate, and the greatest victories belong to those who turn perceived weakness into unexpected strength. Sometimes the brick that seems destined to fall becomes the hammer that shapes history.